Welcome to something special. Welcome to TEDx. This TEDx event is part of a global conversation that takes place every day in every corner of the world. In schools, in theaters, in workplaces, even in prisons, people gather to hear the best ideas bubbling up in their communities. More than 3,000 TEDx events are held every year in 170 countries. It's a remarkable thing. TEDx events are self-organized under a license from TED, a non-profit organization devoted to discovering and sharing powerful ideas in the form of TED Talks. It's not TED itself, but your local TEDx team of volunteers that has done all the work to put on today's event, including booking all of the speakers. It's this team's ideas, dedication, and time that have made this possible. We really hope today's program sparks an exciting conversation. This is a day for curiosity and for skepticism, for inspiration and for action. The more you enter into it, the more you will take out. And now, on with the show.
Greetings and welcome to the first ever TEDxYouth at CCHS virtual event. My name is Sarah Jang.
My name's Karina Lewin.
And my name is Jaden Bradish.
Over spring break, we were able to brainstorm a theme and description for this event. We wanted to bring together the best and brightest from all of the world. Together, we wanted to celebrate inspiration for the youth.
Our mission statement for TEDxYouth at CCHS is to cultivate the next generation's thinkers, advocates, and innovators.
Throughout this event, we would love it if you were able to tag us and through our Instagram, Twitter, or even YouTube page, TEDxYouth at CCHS, so we can see who's in our support.
We know that during events like these, people tend to get tired. So after the sixth speaker, we have scheduled in a break where you can get up, go around, stretch, and get a quick snack.
So sit back, relax, and prepare to be enlightened. Our first speaker is Unnati Gupta.
Unnati Gupta is from Pennsylvania, United States. She is a junior in high school and she's a fellow TEDx creator of TEDx at Berwyn.
Please welcome Unnati to the stage with her speech, COVID-19.
I'm part of Gen Z, the good, the bad, the stereotypes, all of it. And in being part of it, I know one thing. Gen Z wants to win. We don't just want to win in one part of life, we want to win in all of it. We want to be the ones with the highest SAT scores, with the largest scholarships, the ones going to the most pristine universities. We want to be the ones getting onto the best athletic teams. Because for our whole lives, many of us have been told that life is a competition. Life is about beating those around you. Life is about doing what it takes to be the best. And the irony in that is that no one ever truly becomes the best. Once you get a better math score than the kid sitting to your right, there's always a kid 2 seats ahead that may still be smarter. Once you get that athletic scholarship, there's always another more competitive team to make. To get that SAT score, there's always another test to go prove your genius. But nothing makes us want to stop. We achieve one thing, then without thinking, jump right into the next. After the test score becomes the internship, after the internship, the job. And all of a sudden, us as Gen Z, we have trapped ourselves in this cycle. A cycle of winning. For as long as I can remember, I've been running. Looking back, I think I was running on a treadmill with the speed constantly increasing. Every day I would wake up at 6 in the morning, go to school for 8 hours, go to my club meetings and extracurriculars, come home, do the homework for my 5 AP classes, go to bed at 1 a.m. on a good day, get 5 hours of sleep, and wake up at 6 the next morning to do it all over again. At the same time, I was running TEDxYouth at Berwyn, and there's never a shortage of work to be done trying to create your own organization. All around me, there were people telling me to slow down, take a break. I had counselors looking at my schedule with a skeptical glance. There was my basketball coach who claims to have found me sleeping during one of our half times. I'm sure he wasn't wrong, it's just I was so tired I don't even remember falling asleep. I had this rigorous agenda set for myself, one that wasn't fueled by my passions. I didn't go to basketball for 3 hours a day, every day, because I loved it that much. I didn't go to my business club meetings every week because I wanted to be an entrepreneur that badly. Instead, I was fueled by a need to look amazing in front of others. I needed to be the best. Because I'm a Gen Zer, and I'm caught in the cycle of winning. Then comes COVID-19, and almost for every young person overnight, school shut down and a mandatory quarantine begins. And behind the visible panic of the massive unemployment rates, rising death rates, PPE shortages, and businesses closing, was a state of invisible panic felt by Gen Z. All of a sudden, grades turned to pass and fail, colleges became test optional, extracurricular competitions got shut down. In short, there was nothing to win at. There was no GPA benchmark to pass, there was no SAT score to submit, there was no academic competition to place first in. And for many adults, while they left one role and one job, they came into another, which was often taking care of their elders or homeschooling their children. But for a lot of Gen Zers, we didn't have that magnitude of responsibility in this new environment. And because of that, there was a gap. For the first time since I can remember, I woke up in the morning without a purpose. There was nothing to achieve that day. So I froze. Because all my life I've lived in this bubble that's centered around my achievements and my success. So what do we do from the moment we wake up to the moment we go to bed when there is nothing to chase after? There's nothing to prove, no one to prove anything to. For many of us, there was a shock that life goes on without test grades, life goes on without sports competitions. But after we get over this shock, what do we do? And this what do we do moment, this was the moment that became the test for our generation. It was the moment that would define who we are as a group. Are we the people that freeze, that can't go beyond themselves in a moment in a global pandemic? Or are we the people that adapt, to grow, and identify when our community needs us the most? There were two paths we could have taken in this moment. We could have either stepped back and said, well, this is it for us. This problem is too big for us to even try to tackle. Or we could have used our diverse perspectives and our creativity to help those who are suffering, those who were hit hardest by this pandemic. That was the test. And did we pass? Some of us didn't. Some of us decided to go out and party, not wear masks, and disregard the safety of those around them. But many of us passed. Many of us did. Hundreds of kids in the United States started sewing masks and dropping them off in strangers' mailboxes. In India, a 6-year-old girl created a video on how to properly wash your hands. In Bangladesh, a 14-year-old boy shared a video from his refugee camp on how to socially distance. In Switzerland, a young man brought supplies to and kept company with the elderly. In Peru, a young female created a subscription-based survey that distributed accurate COVID-19 information. And that list is just getting started. Around me, my classmates started 3D printing face shields to deliver to healthcare workers. My neighbors wrote cards to give to senior citizens in nursing homes. In the face of uncertainty, many of us were able to rise, and collectively, that effort left a dent in this pandemic. The people in Gen Z are not doctors yet, cannot work in the government yet, many of us can't even vote yet. But in the ways that we could, and to the extent that we could, we worked to make a difference. And why were some of us able to rise up to that challenge? Why didn't we give in or believe this was a fight that was beyond the scope of something we could tackle? I think it's because we were fast-forwarded through a lot of life lessons during this pandemic. I'm the lead organizer for TEDxYouth at Berwyn, and after a year and a half of blood, sweat, and tears to put together our first in-person conference, it was shut down a week before the event date and taken from all of our hands. I watched friends of friends be put into the hospital. I saw on the news the faces of all the families of the hundreds of thousands of individuals who had lost their lives. And while my experience and the experience of many high school students could never compare to the frontline workers that were taking 24-hour shifts, or to the grocery store employees that didn't sign up to be put in life-threatening situations every day, to the actual victims suffering from the effects of COVID-19, it exposed me and exposed many of us for the first time to the feelings of loss, to the pain of death. Many of us had never had anything taken from us, and it made one thing very clear: life isn't fair. And slowly, those lessons turned into a motivation to take control of the aspects of this pandemic that we could. And so we passed. Yay, we proved to the world we can go beyond ourselves. We can break this cycle of winning. We can use our power and motivation to enact change in our community. Our job is done, right? No. Someday this pandemic will end. Someday we will read about it in history books. But what we learn from this cannot float away. This pandemic showed us that we can, and now that we know we can, we must. We must continue to go beyond ourselves, our test scores, our scholarships, and understand how to harness the drive, motivation, and dedication of Gen Z to impact the people around us. And the only way for us to do that is to understand that when everything material is taken away from us, we are left with what matters the most, the community that supports us. And in order to execute this, we have to dig deeper and look beyond what winning is to why we win, and redefine why we win. I can't sit here and tell you that winning is bad, that striving to be good at something is going to harm the community, because it's not. But what we often don't realize is the motivation behind us winning. As a part of Gen Z, many of us have been blindly winning and achieving. We simply want to check off that box of achievement without consideration, start to chase after the next thing we can be the best in. Instead, what if we won with the purpose of taking our knowledge and taking our accomplishments to use for the benefit of those surrounding us? Next time when you get a great SAT score, can you volunteer to tutor someone else so they can do the same? Next time you get an internship opportunity, will you stop every morning and identify the ways in which you could use your platform to advocate for change in an issue that that company has the capability of tackling? Because if each and every one of us can rewire our brains to approach competition as an opportunity for growth, as a chance to go beyond ourselves, to leave a lasting impression in our communities, then we are a generation that has really passed the test. Thank you.
Wow, great job, Unnati. I was super impressed by your hard work and motivation in education. Next up, we have Malone Mukwende.
Malone Mukwende is a third-year medical student in the United Kingdom. He is the co-author of the book Mind the Gap, which is a clinical handbook that shows the signs and symptoms of illnesses and diseases on people of color skin.
Since its original release, Mind the Gap has been seen and shared over 100 million times on social media. His book has begun to reshape the way that healthcare is taught at schools.
Everyone, please give me an honor and welcome Malone Mukwende to the stage with his speech, Mind the Gap.
Have you ever wondered what clinical signs look like on black and brown skin? Now, have you ever tried to Google how these images present on black and brown skin? I did something about that. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my journey, but first let me get rid of the elephant in the room. As you can see here, I put my red trainers and my books because I couldn't be at the TED Talks today because of COVID-19. However, that did not stop me from giving this presentation. So my journey started about 5 years ago when I was 15 years old. I could tell you a little bit more about my life story, but I don't want to bore you with the facts, so we're going to go with that. So when I was 15 years old, I started a clothing line, which was to the surprise of many, as I was very young and people were like, how are you getting involved in such things at such a young age? However, while I was operating this clothing line, it taught me a lot of things which I would never learn in a school setting. This taught me things such as people interaction, because I had to satisfy people by fulfilling their orders. And it also taught me other things such as putting ideas on pen and paper and bringing them to life. This was good because I feel like sometimes we have so many thoughts in our heads and we let them go past us instead of allowing them to materialize and allowing the vision to come true. Unfortunately, I had to take a break from my clothing line because I now had to focus on my studies as I was trying to apply to medical school. So the medical school application in the UK begins when you're about 17 years old. So I went through the whole application and unfortunately I got rejected from 4 medical schools. Of course, this left me feeling a bit deflated, a bit demotivated, but it was something that I would always tell myself that I cannot sit here and cry over spilt milk all day, because whilst I'm crying over spilt milk, I'm not actually doing anything to address the situation or anything actively to try and get myself into medical school. So it's something that I knew that my emotions don't stop time and I need to use how I'm feeling as fuel to propel me into the positions where I want to be. Luckily, on results day, I managed to get into medical school because I got the grades which were required. However, when I got to medical school, I noticed something which was very alarming, something which almost didn't make sense to me at the time. So when I got into medical school, one of the first things, or one of the very first observations that I made is, we're not really being taught a lot of things on darker skins. And it wasn't making sense to me because I thought medicine is the study of human beings and like we need to be able to treat all of the population. I noticed there was a lack of imagery that were being used. And this, when I say this, I mean in lectures and clinical skills and in other experiences with medical school. So it was very concerning to me because I would sit there and think, okay, this is how X symptom presents on white skin. However, how does it present on darker skin? So with my curiosity, I went to ask different lecturers. And a lot of the time I would ask them, oh, so how does meningitis present on darker skin? And no one could really give me a clear, coherent answer. And I found this to be almost alarming because when I asked the same question on white skin, everyone could tell me how it presents. So then I moved on to not only asking lecturers, but I thought, oh, let me go and ask some doctors too, because they have experiences with this on a day-to-day basis. However, these doctors too, they could not tell me a coherent answer. And let me be real with you, this was very concerning. So because, like I said earlier, I felt like I was lucky to get into medical school because I almost got in through the back door and a non-conventional route. So when I got to medical school, I suffered from this phenomenon called imposter syndrome, which is where people almost feel like they have to psychologically change themselves just to fit in with the environment that they're in so they don't get exposed as a fraud. So I would go about my days not trying to be exposed as a fraud, almost trying to fit into this medical student persona. And what I didn't realize at the time, this was really damaging for my own personality because I was finding myself changing my ways and doing stuff just to fit in with my environment. If I give you 2 examples of ways that I changed just to fit in with my environment. So number 1, I changed the way that I speak. So if you meet with me on a day-to-day basis or chilling with the mandem or chilling with the boys, you'll find me speaking in a certain way and that's just how I am when I'm comfortable. However, at medical school, I tried to leave this in the past. I almost tried to forget about the person I was before I came to medical school. And this had such a huge toll on my mental being because I was finding myself that I'm not me. And number 2, I was now starting to change some of my habits, some of the things that I enjoyed doing. One of them notably was my interest and love for rap music. When I arrived at medical school, I couldn't really find many people who had the same interests or the same love for rap music as I do. So where I would usually listen to 50 Cent or Stormzy or Jay-Z, now I was changing my ways to listen to Oasis. And of course, this wasn't me. And I was forcing myself just to fit in with this persona, and it wasn't making a lot of sense. As you can imagine, this was a difficult time for me. My arrival at medical school did not go as I planned in my head. I found myself now running away from Malone and trying to fit in with being a medical student. But one fundamental principle that I forgot is that I was Malone before I was a medical student. The person that I was on the inside knew that I have to be questioning these things. I knew that I need to be asking more questions about why are we not being taught things on darker skins. However, the person that I was on the outside was fighting an endless battle with being a medical student, trying to fit into this persona, trying to almost make myself seem like everybody else there. However, I knew that just wasn't me. This inner conflict within myself stopped me from being able to have uncomfortable conversations. Although short, my medical career thus far has been very eventful. And I've learned 3 important things along the way, which I'm going to now share with you guys to help you bridge the gap from wherever you are. Number 1, so overcoming fear. As mentioned earlier, I felt lucky to even be at medical school. And this allows some fears to manifest in me, like, how am I even going to cope? How am I going to get myself up to the level that everybody else was at? Because in my head, I'd pitched them to be so much more intelligent than me and just better at the course than I was. Although we all entered into the course with the same entry requirements, I just felt like they were a lot more superior to me. And let me tell you something, that's very far from the truth. As you can see, I was letting my fears get me down and almost lead me to an extent of overthinking. And in this state of overthinking, I wasn't doing anything to get myself out of this position. This is something which I call paralysis by analysis. I was analyzing the situation so much that it was leading me to just do nothing and be still. So I think it's so important that you need to write down your fears on a piece of paper, acknowledge your fears so that you can actively do stuff to almost eradicate these fears. Obviously, this is easier said than done and it's almost a slow burner, so don't be expecting change to come overnight. I think it's so important that we tackle our fears head on instead of running away from them all the time because this will be an endless race. Alright, so boom, yeah. Point number 2, individuality. The person that you are on the inside will always be the person that you are on the outside. So don't find yourself running away from your most prized possession, which is your originality. So of course, this is not going to be accepted everywhere you go. And this is just the nature of people, and it's almost difficult to change the people around you. However, it's so important to have this supreme confidence in yourself, because once you reach that level of confidence, nobody can chat to you. You're the one who dictates how things want to go, and your individuality is what will take you places. It's important to own yourself and run with who you are, because nobody can do you better than you. So point number 3 is Tanga. And Tanga in my native language of Shona means to start. And I think this is so important because a lot of the time people don't actually do this step. Although it's simple, I think as people we often complicate this step. We always look at what we don't have instead of what we do have. It's so important to start with what you have and start with where you are and go from there. One motto that I use to myself a lot of the time is better to fail forwards than to do nothing at all. So I urge you who's watching this video to just begin with what you have and begin with where you are and be the change that you want to see in this world. On the subject of change, I'm seeking a future which is more inclusive in healthcare. I believe that as future healthcare professionals, we need to take accountability for some of the problems that exist in the world today. From there, we can then use this information to better treat the patients of tomorrow. I believe that we need to stop blaming patients and almost making some of the healthcare disparities seem like it's their fault, and take a step back and almost acknowledge that we have the power to change this for the patients. So one of my solutions to this problem is by tackling medical education. I believe that this is a system which needs to be reformed. As things currently stand, there is many biases which are allowed to manifest in medical school and other healthcare settings. As a result of this, people are carrying these things out into the workplace. And unfortunately, when they get into the workplace, the consequence of these biases is that patients are dying. I think it's so important that we tackle this issue from a bottom-up perspective, because prevention is better than cure. Simultaneously, I'm calling on all top governing bodies to help us to accelerate this cause so that we can see a universal change across the world. The theme of my TED Talk has been inspire. I hope you have been inspired by my journey so that one day I can be inspired by your journey too. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
Thank you so much, Malone. Our next TED speaker is an international Mensa student hailing from Italy, Guido Putignano. He has created a company that decreases data pollution.
Not only that, but he is the youngest ambassador in the world to be a part of OpenExa, which is the most important community for exponential managers.
Additionally, Guido has been a part of many European technological boards that have advanced the way technology is used in Europe and throughout the world.
Please welcome Guido in his speech, The Future of the World, How Digitalization Will Transform the Structure of the World.
So, the future of work. Let's talk about that. 100 years ago, one of the most curious people in the world, I'm not talking about Charlie Chaplin, it has drastically changed our world. It was started as a farmer, and after hard work and intelligent, is now famous for having made any car accessible to anybody. Do you know what I'm talking about? Sure, I'm talking about Henry Ford. It's now famous for that. He made any car accessible to anybody thanks to industrialization. But well, what does industrialization do? It does that. It makes any item accessible to anyone. Now we're going to do another leap, which is called digitalization. In this case, we mostly to think about cars. What do cars do? They make you achieve a service or experience. But digitalization instead makes the path to achieve it shorter. I just make some examples. What is the app that you have just to click a button to go anywhere you want? It's Uber, and it's a service. What is instead the app if you just click a button to see anything you want anywhere you are? It's Netflix, it's an experience. You don't have needed to go to the cinema to see it anymore. So today we're going to talk about the future of work and all these skills that we have to learn to adapt to this new era. So before talking about that, let's talk about the past. Gustave Eiffel has started a new field, which was called engineering architecture, which was a new kind of architecture or engineering that used to apply mathematical formulas to build buildings. In other words, first, let's think about maths, then start building fancy things. Now, we don't think about it anymore. It's not before people are starting doing something like that. It won't happen anymore in any time unless you use Photoshop. But in reality, it's because it's already assumed. People already think about it. As it was in the past, now it's the same with digitalization. We are digital something. I could be digital speaker, digital author, digital manager, but digitalization is a common background for anyone's life. So, if I have to think which skills will be more and more needed in the future, I can divide it into main types. The first one are what's called soft skills. The second ones are called hard skills. Soft skills are mostly related to your personality, so emotional intelligence, creativity, communication, and how to fulfill your life. Hard skills instead are mostly related to exponential markets, such as blockchain, stem cell, artificial intelligence, quantum computer, CRISPR, and synthetic biology. Both are important, because if you don't have to think that if you make better soft skills, you can do the same with hard skills. So you don't have to think as Batman and Joker, Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker, or Coca-Cola and Pepsi. But instead, you have to think in a supportive way, such as SpongeBob Patrick or bread with Nutella. And personally, I prefer the last one. So if I had to choose just 3 skills and it will drastically be important in the future, what will I choose? So the first one is creativity. Creativity is to create something valuable that wasn't present before. If I start drawing something, I'm not creating at all, because I'm not giving value to society. But instead, if I start designing any kind of slide, I'm highly creative, because I can influence people. Steve Jobs used to say, creativity is just about connecting things. So from tomorrow, go outside and think about 2 different fields and what they have in common to create something new, something valuable. The second point is emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is the ability to master your emotions. So to be happier, grittier, and to live a more fulfilled life. Martin Seligman is the father of positive psychology, and he understood a way to make people happier and to live a more fulfilling life, to go over the Maslow hierarchy. The last one is about communication. Communication is the ability to tell about yourself, about your brand, about your history, and to make people think about your values. Carmine Gallo used to say, people don't buy products, they buy stories. Even if you could say a so bright future, there are still some problems. The first one is called AI Painter. 2 years ago, there was this painting made by AI system, and when you ask people if they can do better than that, there are 2 types of answers. The first one is no. The second one is just a lie. The second picture is about Replica, replica.ai. And it's a software that tells you how are you, how do you feel, what have you done today. And even if you could say a strange thing, in reality, let's think about people that are depressed, that don't have any kind of money to pay for a psychologist, for example, or they won't be judged. The last one is Watson. It's an AI system that almost 7 years ago took at a series, an event, which was Jeopardy, and he won against the 2 most important people in the world at this game. We can say 2 main things. The first one is that AI systems are going to be better and better at public speaking. The second one is that even AI loves money. So, the next question is, what will be the winners and the losers of this new era? And the answer is nobody. Because even if according to everyone, there's going to be a winner and a loser, and even if there are going to be more and more people that are going to be richer and richer, and they even will be able to enhance themselves, to be stronger, to be more beautiful, more intelligent, to have smarter kids, and even if it's going to be the useless class, people that won't be needed anymore, in reality, AI systems are going to do the majority of the task. So, in few sentences, the future work is the end of it. But it will be lower than people think, faster than people hope. Because also in this case, we have to use the theory of evolution and adaptation. Evolution is up to innovation, adaptation is up to you. Just people can understand what they can apply and at what period of their life. So, to sum up, we also understand that when digitalization comes, everything becomes for free. One example is musical disc. Before they used to cost $15, now they are for free. And in any kind of case, it is going to be more and more like this one. Because the ethics of a society changed based on the practical need of it. One example is during the Roman Empire, when there was this old saying that was everyone is equal. But according to them, someone was more equal than others. What's that? Yeah, because they used to have slaves. And they were not like other people, they were considered as objects, because slaves were needed to society. It has been the same with child labor during the Industrial Revolution, and it's also the same with meat now. Imagine if someone kills a dog. What's happened? It goes to jail. Imagine if someone kills a cow. What happens? It goes to a lunch instead. So we're going to go over the Maslow hierarchy to have a more fulfilling life and to think about the purpose and not the basic needs. And for this reason, volunteering is more and more important. People don't think about money anymore. But in any case, the best way to predict the future is to invent it. And if you can't be bold enough, you can't aim big enough. Thank you. Adesso facciamo Q&A. Se volete.
Thank you so much, Guido. Next up, we have Yuvraj Dhindsa.
Yuvraj is interested in transforming the way that mental health is treated.
Please welcome Yuvraj to the stage with this speech, How Brain-Computer Interfaces Can Change Mental Health.
DK, a 26-year-old South Asian man, living an average life in Calgary, Alberta. No, he doesn't work at a gas station, nor owns one. But in 2018, DK had gone through a life-threatening mental illness, depression. Being South Asian, we grew up being told that mental illness is a bad thing and that it was unacceptable. Now, DK had told his parents, after suffering from depression for the longest time, and his parents were shocked, and they handled it as if depression was a joke. DK was in the lowest point of his life, after getting no help and being hospitalized. Luckily, my awe-inspiring friend was holding his hand the whole way through. Yet, this isn't the case for everyone. Not everyone has a shoulder to lay on, or the ability to hold a person's hand. Now I got the chance to speak with DK, and he'd like to share his story with all of you today.
So, like, during my depression time, like, things were pretty bad. Like, it was, like, I couldn't get out of bed, I couldn't do anything, I had no motivation to do anything. I kept on having thoughts, like, if I wasn't here, life would be better for everyone else, like my family and my friends. And, like, being from the South Asian community, it was pretty hard to tell someone that I was going through this because, like, everyone's just so judgmental. Like, for one thing, I didn't tell my parents for the longest time just because I didn't know how they react, because now, like, South Asian parents, like, I don't know, I think they're just very overprotective, and I just didn't want them to take, like, have stress in their life due to me and my health. And I didn't tell for the longest time. I did tell a couple of my friends, and they would all just say, like, hey, it's nothing, you'll be fine. But not all of them, like, some of them were actually taking seriously, and they would talk to me and, like, try to help me out a bit. But majority of them were just kept on saying, oh, nothing, you'll be a man, nothing's wrong, be strong, here, have a drink, like, you know, the typical guy stuff that people, like, would say. And then when I eventually did tell my parents, then And it just got to the point where instead of understanding that this is a mental problem, it was just mostly they kept on asking, oh, what's wrong? They thought I was involved in some, wrong stuff, they thought I was involved in gangs or drugs. Maybe I did something so bad that I'm at that point where I think life is not good anymore. And they just kept on trying to figure out why I'm depressed, even though I was telling them that, hey, it's the doctor said the same thing, that it's not a specific event that triggers it. It could be just a mental illness. And instead of understanding that, they were more oh, what's wrong? Why are you doing this? Why are you depressed? What's wrong? What did you do? Did you do anything stupid? Are you in trouble? Are you stuck somewhere? Or it got to the point where they don't understand mental illness. For them, it's not that. For them, mental illness is not that serious, right? For them, it's instead of being supportive, is by their questions and everything, it just kind of made it more worse.
Now, this is just one person out of the 264 million people that suffer from mental illness globally. DK has stated numerous times that South Asian parents come to conclusions when it comes down to mental illness. Elders in the South Asian community tend to think of mental illness as something in your head, and they would say things to victims like, come on, get up, let's go, we never had this in our time. And that's why I'm here today, to inspire the elders of South Asian communities, to help them realize that mental illness should be treated like a gym. Currently, India is one of the most technologically advanced countries in the world. It somehow takes the title for being the most depressed country in the world. Almost 135,000 Indians commit suicide, which is 17% of the 800,000 people that do commit suicide around the world. Why is this? Well, growing up, I've always attended a South Asian dominant school, and I've heard from many points of views. Hearing from Indian kids my age, they state that they get pressured when it comes down to academic performance. Essentially, the goal for South Asian parents is to guide their children to become a doctor or a lawyer and live a happy life. At least that's what they see as a happy life. Yet they don't look at the other things like joy and actual happiness. I'm disappointed in my own country. With the most engineers and doctors coming out of India, my own country still lacks in one of the world's biggest problems. I've conducted a poll to see how many people suffer from depression in my own community. And out of 100 people, it shows that 46.7% of people suffer from depression. This number shocked me, and I want to take action, but how? Well, technology is changing the world as we know it, with future developments like AI bots doing everyday work, to talking with each other with just our minds. These technological advancements could help us focus more on issues like climate change and world hunger. One technological advancement being used right now by numerous companies is called a brain-computer interface. BCIs are changing the way we can connect our brains to computing devices, like iPhones and laptops. This probably sounds like it's coming out of a movie, but no, companies like Neuralink, Neurable, and Neurodust are all using BCIs to solve real-world problems, such as curing epilepsy and curing other diseases that primarily affect the brain. Now, you're probably asking yourself, well, how does it work? Well, a BCI records or interprets or decodes a brain signal. Neurons Wait, I'm going way too fast. Let me explain to you what a neuron is. A neuron is a nerve cell where there are hair-like receptors known as dendrites that collect information from other neurons. This information comes in the form of a chemical called a neurotransmitter. We can use BCIs in many different ways, one being an EEG, short for electroencephalography. EEGs can primarily record and interpret postsynaptic potentials, and you can record information from multiple neurons. This right here is an EEG. No, not an egg. This right here is an EEG. These little things that look like Smarties connect to the brain and are called electrodes. These electrodes are what we use to see what's going on inside our brain. Now, how does this relate to mental illness in any way? Well, scientists believe mental illness occurs when there is less neurotransmission between neurons. An example of that is when DK had less neurotransmission serotonin in 2018 compared to others in his depressive state. We can use an EEG to detect neurotransmission between each neuron. Although there are prescribed medications for mental illness, this would be a better way for us to understand how the brain copes with mental illness. Now, I think we should work together and use technology to our advantage to conquer mental illness. Thank you.
Thank you, Yuvraj. Our next speaker has worked alongside neuroscientist Dr. Kiss.
He is Adam Gulamhusein, a curious and ambitious student who has researched the use of brain-computer interfaces, connectomics, and optogenetics in the treatment of addiction.
Adam is only 17 years old, hailing all the way from Calgary, Canada. He is extremely inspired to best fight addiction through the use of brain-computer interface technology.
Please welcome to the stage Adam in his speech, Brain-Computer Interfaces, Fighting for Addiction.
What happens when you're driving down the street and you see a red light? Well, you stop. And when there's a green light, you go. This kind of organization allows people to get from point A to point B much more safely, much more effectively, and much more efficiently. Now, imagine going through Midtown New York and there aren't any traffic lights. Well, you might get from point A to point B, but it might be far less efficient, far less effective, and a lot more dangerous. Now, we see the same issues arising in neuroscience, where we're using techniques like deep brain stimulation, or DBS, or transcranial magnetic stimulation, or TMS, and using these methods to treat patients. And while they do end up benefiting patients, there are far more precise ways of going about it. Now, DBS can be used to treat Parkinson's and treatment-resistant depression, and now potentially addiction. But it's still a very vast generalization of what we can do. When we introduce this kind of precision, like traffic lights, where we're telling some neurons to fire and others not to fire, we're able to control the direction of research and of different pathways in the brain and really help patients in a way which we never were before. And not just through studying the brain, but actually using this idea to treat patients. Now, this seems interesting. Like, what could we use to do something like this? How could we go about approaching a problem like this? Well, the idea and the solution for this was proposed not that long ago, but also not that recently. And it was proposed by a man who forever changed the way that we view ourselves and we view the world around us. Now, his name was Francis Crick, and he won a Nobel Prize for his work in discovering DNA. Now, after his Nobel Prize, Francis Crick started to propose the idea that neurons could potentially be controlled with light. Now, how exactly does this happen? How do neurons get controlled with light, and what would be the benefit to doing that? What would that even look like? Well, it looks something like this, where we see experiments being used on mice, and generally there's a fiber optic cable which is implanted into the brain of the mouse, and a certain type or certain color of light is emitted. And once these mice's brain have been altered, then they react to this stimulation differently than another mouse would have. And often there are beneficial results that are far, far better than the generalization of treatment that we give to patients today. Now, I've been talking about precision. Well, how does this new field called optogenetics and using light to stimulate neurons make our research more precise? Well, when we look at the brain right now, if we wanted to activate certain neurons, we could use electrical stimulation, where that turns on a vast majority of neurons which are close to the electrode, which is implanted. Now, there's also light stimulation, which does absolutely nothing because our brains are not built to react to light. Then, if we have optogenetic stimulation, there are certain neurons which we can cause to fire, and certain neurons which we can say not to fire, and we're able to better understand the role of individual neurons and pathways in the brain far better than we were before. Now, how do we go about doing this? How do we go about trying to allow neurons to react to light? Because if that happened right now, we would probably be very different people, because that's not something that we need biologically. So how do we go about doing this? Well, we see the mouse here with its fiber optic cable. Well, let's go a little bit deeper and see how the very basic unit of the brain is being controlled. Well, we have the neuron, and the neurons are made up of dendrites, and there's a soma and an axon. But what's more important is these proteins. And these proteins allow for certain ions to move in and out of the neuron. That allows certain neurons to fire and may cause other neurons to be inhibited. Well, when neurons fire, what happens is sodium ions move into the cell and potassium ions move out of the cell. Now, these are called depolarization and repolarization, which causes an action potential, which is just the firing of the neuron. Now, how does this help us? We know, okay, we need to focus on neurons and we need to focus on these proteins specifically. But how do we still cause these proteins to react to light? Because they don't right now, and I had no idea how to approach this when I thought of this question. Now, it turns out that the natural world, yet again, is our inspiration and provides us the answer to a question. The natural world is beautiful in its simplicity, and it offers us a solution to this problem. Specifically, algae have these different channels which are proteins, and they respond to light. And based on the color of light which they're exposed to, they can either cause the excitation of neurons or the inhibition of them. Now, again, okay, we know that algae have different kinds of channels than we do in our brain, and we know that they can respond to light. But how do we just take algae and then just put it in our brain? How exactly do we go about doing that? And would it help? Well, our first step is using gene therapy. So gene therapy, specifically using a viral vector, allows us to deliver an opsin gene or a transgene to certain neurons. And we're able to specify the type of neurons that we want to have this delivered to with something called a promoter. And the promoter allows us to determine which neurons get this new gene and which don't. And the ones which do end up expressing these proteins or these channels. And then after that, we see using light stimulation, they will be inhibited or they will be excited or fired. Now, these specific proteins are called opsins, which is why the transgene in the viral vector is called an opsin gene in this case. So once the genes from the algae are induced into our brain with gene therapy, we can start to express these specific proteins and our brains can start to react to light. Now, why would we even want to go about doing this? What is the benefit to that? Well, the next part, after we introduce the viral vector and cause the expression of these proteins, we can see that we're starting to go after something that we never thought we would have been able to in the first place. And that is going after something like blindness, and specific types of blindness specifically, where there is the degeneration of, say, the macula, and which is called macular degeneration, but anything really with the degradation of photoreceptors. And photoreceptors, like rods and cones, after they start to disappear, they die, what happens is people go blind. Well, instead of trying to regenerate photoreceptors, if we cause the expression of these different opsins on bipolar cells, which are seen in the middle between photoreceptors and ganglion cells, then we're able to allow people to see again because, well, they don't need the photoreceptors anymore because only certain bipolar cells are firing based on the type of light which they are exposed to. Now again, this sounds really interesting. How do we do this? How do we go about doing this? And what else can we treat beyond just blindness? Well, it turns out that we can use optogenetics not just to study the brain and to treat illnesses like blindness, but we can also go after treating something like traumatic brain injury or spinal cord injury, or even something like addiction. And this would work with something like this, where in addiction, there are certain pathways in the brain which are activated. These are generally dopaminergic pathways, and specifically two of them, the mesocortical and the mesolimbic pathways, where we see the ventral tegmental area connecting to the nucleus accumbens and to the prefrontal cortex. Now, first off, what are we doing now to treat addiction, and can optogenetics take that? The answer to that question is yes. Optogenetics can take what we're doing much, much further. Here is a quick project that I put together where I'm using machine learning to determine the statistics of someone potentially becoming addicted to an opioid. And this model works on the big 5 personality traits. And this is a psychological term, but if we look at the biology behind these traits and go after treating the changes in that biology directly, we don't just have to worry about diagnosing patients, we can actually start treating them in a much better way. Now, when we look at the treatment of something like addiction and going and treating the specific pathways of the brain which are affected by drug-evoked synaptic plasticity, or any kind of substance abuse or any kind of addiction, which may not just be drugs, but we can start to manipulate the neurons along these pathways and cause a different reaction from patients than something like rehab would cause. And this allows us to treat patients much, much better than they were before. Now, why do we want to do something like this? Because we see that, well, this is going to be expensive, it's going to be risky, and it's probably going to be very controversial. But with the opioid crisis and with so many people dying every day, not just in the States and not just in Canada, but across the world from substance abuse, well, there doesn't seem to be a reason to not try to do better. And right now, over the past decade, we've seen this happening, where one team used lasers in optogenetics to start to target cells in the amygdala. And they did this, and they noticed that mice that were treated with this new type of therapy ended up going back to pre-dependent drinking levels after their withdrawal stage and after they were re-exposed to the same substance. Now, the mice which didn't have this therapy, they ended up going right back to where they were and generally taking off much further, drinking much more than they were before, because now, after the withdrawal stage, them drinking more helps to rid themselves of this negative feedback loop where they feel terrible and they feel physiologically dependent on the substance which they are using. So it was interesting, though, with this case, that it wasn't just the fact that the mice didn't go back to their pre-dependent drinking levels, but the mice that had this therapy had a far less greater physiological response after or during their withdrawal period. And that is something which is extremely important because we see patients now who suffer from addiction, and what happens is that their body becomes physiologically connected to whatever substance they're taking, and not taking it can very easily end up in gruesome symptoms and even death. So this idea of limiting the body's reaction to the certain substances which someone could be using wasn't just seen with alcoholism in mice and focusing lasers on the amygdala, but it was also seen in mice that were cocaine addicted. And when the mice who had this compulsive behavior to seek out cocaine were treated with optogenetics, specifically in their prefrontal cortex, it was found that their compulsive behavior diminished. And again, their physiological dependence on cocaine also seemed to dissipate, especially compared to the mice which weren't given this treatment. So there's these extremely important breakthroughs and these extremely important experiments which are taking place allow us to treat patients in a way which we never thought we were able to before. But more importantly, it's also important to notice that people who suffer from addiction are often treated like they are intrinsically less, or they're just inherently wrong, and that couldn't be further from the truth. Patients who suffer from addiction end up fighting the fight of their life every single day, and often they end up winning. Now, if we can make this process a little bit easier for the patients who do receive treatment and make treatment more widespread, we have the ability to combat something which takes hundreds of lives every single day in the United States and thousands of lives every single day across the world. So if we have this chance with this new technology, I'd say that we take it. And while we should be cautious, we should be erring on the safety of patients, we should also be investing time and money into researching these types of emerging therapies and technologies, because they do truly offer a way for us to do something which we were never able to before, not just for blindness and not just for addiction, but for patients who suffer from a variety of neurological illnesses. Thank you for listening.
Wow, thank you so much for your amazing speech, Adam.
Our next speaker is Carlos Jarqiun, who currently lives in Los Angeles, California, and he is also part of the Knowledge Society.
Today, Carlos will be discussing how Gen Z is going to send a message to our current society. Please welcome Carlos to the virtual stage.
I believe that going to school 5 days a week to sit in a classroom for countless hours to be obedient, well-dressed, writing and copying notes onto paper, and then finally having report cards to measure academic intelligence and a person's future are the worst traits possible in an individual and in society. This type of educational system is no longer valuable to optimize the future for billions of people. In elementary school, I hated the education I received. I was molded at a very young age to dress a certain way, behave a certain way, learn a certain way, and to be me in a certain way. In order to escape that system, I taught myself astronomy and science. I loved learning about these topics, and I even dressed up like an astronaut. But the thing that made me very happy was I had the freedom to learn whatever I wanted to and apply the information to my life. I felt as if I had so much potential in my life in the future. I tried to continue this passion in middle school, but the education system destroyed my momentum with obedience, bullying, and isolation. Ever since the 6th grade, I became a shadow of my former ambitious self. It was until March 2020 when I was introduced to COVID-19 and the quarantine lifestyle. It was until I was in quarantine where I asked myself, who do I want to be after the pandemic is over? So I started by teaching myself about viruses, space technology, gene editing, nanotechnology, philosophy, and many more topics to further enhance my knowledge. And on top of that, I joined a few programs to enhance my new skills that I probably would have never known about had it not been my ambition to educate myself. Just like when I was a child, I felt as if my potential was maximizing by the minute. However, my favorite moment in quarantine was when I watched the Apollo 11 lunar landing on YouTube. What Neil Armstrong said when he stepped on the moon still motivates me to this day. One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. But even after mentioning all of this to you, have you noticed something different? I have been using YouTube, Medium, Coursera, hardcover books, and other applications to optimize my learning and maximize my awareness of the present without a teacher or sitting in a classroom. Instead, I am trying to educate myself about my passions with the resources that are accessible to me. Long story short, I took the first step to make a giant leap towards my potential future, which made me wonder, what will happen to schools in the future? Before most of us were born, there was an education system that optimized people for maximum human performance. But living in a time where we cannot step outside of our homes without a mask, why do we need to perform at our maximum capacity? The education system that has raised us is expiring. To put it simply, the education system needs to be optimized with new fundamental values that breed a new culture of individual innovation. This culture of education should demand the foundations on how to learn, to develop the advanced skill sets, and to learn how to teach an individual about themselves. But before I begin my dream of the future of education, I would like to quickly note that while you may have some objections towards my ideas and beliefs, I hope you do not listen with the intent to reply about my opinions, but rather listen with the intent to understand my ideas and hopefully resonate them with you to start learning about the change and optimization we need to maximize our potential in the present and in the future. Secondly, I will not add any pictures or images. I want you to dream about the future in your own way. Be creative with it. This is not school. This is your own imagination. Let's start with the first core value, how to learn. I mentioned earlier that I used the internet to learn more about topics that I was curious about, and I did not have to pay a single penny. In general, technology is digital portals to all the information ever known to mankind. I believe that schools are training our maximum human performance to try and replicate Alexa or Siri. Humans are not optimized to be robots. Instead, society has to adapt to the availability of the information that can be discovered with just one Google search. The second core value is how to leverage the technology into the classroom. Now that we have the awareness of how easy it is to access information, we have the potential to optimize the education system with technology. This is when artificial intelligence, or AI, can play a crucial factor. AI can be personalized to people's forms of learning based on the child's preferred teaching style and adjust the courses more appropriately for the person. Secondly, AI can benefit students with special needs like ADHD or dyslexia. AI can personalize their curriculum to their necessities as well, so everyone has an equal and optimized education. But does that mean teachers will be a thing of the past? Not really. They'll have a different occupation. My third core value is soft skill coaches. Educators, teachers will become soft skill mentors for the future. Teachers are marvelous people who are very patient, they're calm under a student's ignorance, and overall they're kind and empathetic. I highly believe that teachers in the future will be those soft skill coaches or the mentors that guide us through some of these critical skill sets that are demanded in the future. Some of these skill sets include empathy, creativity, collaboration, critical thinking, problem solving, emotional intelligence, integrity, and so many more. But in a world that thrives on this technology, there will be so many leaders who will need to invest the effort in the skills for the longevity of their companies and organizations. After all, these skill sets are something you cannot find in current machines or software. So it must be a priority to strengthen the skill sets for the preparation for the future. The fourth and final value combines all the three previous values to make the ideal education. So let's imagine the education system did follow the first three values. But if kids are learning about whatever they want to learn and applying these essential skill sets to their knowledge, shouldn't they have the opportunity to practice those knowledge and skill sets? So in the future, I can see young people having internships and job opportunities to understand the relevance of why whatever they learn is valuable. If we do not show the truth of why they need to understand this information, they will not know how to use it, when to use it, where to use it, and why to even use it in the first place. So I believe now age is just a number. It is now going to depend on ability. And who knows, maybe a 7-year-old CEO might emerge from this ideal education. That would be crazy. It's almost as crazy when the President John F. Kennedy said, "Let's put people on the moon." I hope this sounds like a sweet dream, but it's time to wake up. Back to reality. But why? That dream of optimizing the education and the future, it sounds promising. But I forgot to tell you one thing. All these values I have just mentioned will never be possible because the education system has always failed to create a solution to the biggest problem ever faced in the history of mankind. And that challenge is called maximum human potential. But what is maximum human potential? For me, it's a person's creative intelligence. It is to be unique, and to be different. Leveraging maximum human potential throughout my childhood and quarantine allowed me to create my own ideas, dream big, and to take action, so my personal dreams will turn into a reality. Maximum human potential, however, is not something you will learn by doing the same thing I did or anyone else. This will be an individual journey. And this journey has no end, unless you decide that there is an end. But I do not want you to think that. Your maximum human potential may only be one step away. So I want to leave you some pillars to have on your path to your own maximum human potential. But you do not have to agree with them. But I hope that you take them into consideration and let this advice echo throughout society. The first pillar is to believe in yourself. Ask yourself, who do you want to be in the present? Who do you want to be in the future? Who am I in the vision? I'm not asking anyone else to answer that question for you. This is an individual question. Who do you want to be? What makes you happy? Do those things that spark curiosity and ambition to achieve a successful future. So I believe the first pillar is to be who you want to be and make sure you're happy with that vision. The second pillar is to be very ambitious. You will have to do things that nobody else has even thought or done to maximize your own potential. As a kid, people told me that I would never become anything I've always dreamt of because it was just too crazy. Not true. I was willing to put in that work and to do whatever it takes, despite how crazy or ridiculous it may sound to other people. Why? Because I believed in myself and I believe that I can make the dreams come true. So the second pillar is to be very ambitious. The third pillar is to be comfortable being uncomfortable. And do not be afraid to fail on the journey and never use fear to implement a vision. I have failed so many times in my life to implement the goals and my own maximum human potential. But I hated failure because I was not comfortable with those setbacks. So sometimes I became demotivated and felt as if that was the end of the road. But failure told me that you can improve. I told you where to improve. But I was also happy with it because I knew to get to those dreams, I had to fail. And it would be consistent. But as long as you persevere through it, you will get to the end. Second, I never want you to implement the fear in a vision. In a world that is already dominated by fear and uncertainty, failure kills the desire to continue go into the unknown, while fear kills the desire to even start. Innovation is destroyed by society's truths and stored in the worst outcomes possible. I urge you to eradicate your fears and embrace the failure to become a successful person. The fourth pillar is how bad do you want to achieve your potential and those dreams? How bad do you want the dreams to become a reality? I spent countless hours working my butt off to try and get to those dreams. But I also made sure I had time to relax and enjoy the moment. But I never used it as an excuse to not work hard enough to implement the dreams into the reality. But if you do not put every ounce of effort into the dreams and values, do you truly believe in that dream? The fifth and final pillar is to be yourself. Everyone is unique in their own special way. Embrace that pillar to its highest potential. Because in order to achieve unconventional success, you need to take an unconventional path. But to take an unconventional path, it requires an unconventional person. That unconventional person is who you truly are and who you truly want to be. So be that unconventional person, and you will reach unconventional success. If there is something I want you to take away from all I have said, it would be this. Sometimes you may find yourself in a system or situation where you do not like it. So why are you still believing that there is one system to get to the future? Escape the void of satisfaction. Get out. Build your own thing. Vision your dreams and create your dreams. Disrupt the system. Maximize your human potential. It's one small step for man, but it's one giant leap for mankind. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carlos. Next up, we have Shveenita Kanapathy, hailing all the way from Malaysia.
Please welcome Shveenita and her speech, The Key to Effective Learning.
So a few years ago, I was reading this book and I stumbled upon this quote. It said, "Good students become good employees, but self-learners become the best employers," which intrigued me because we hear stories and news about good students out there all the time. Students who get amazing SAT scores and perfect grades. But how many of us are good self-learners? During this recent COVID-19 pandemic quarantine, almost the entire world had to experiment being self-learners. And it really wasn't until then that most of us realize how bad we are at focusing and concentrating on a task when there are distractions all around us. So for most of us, this led to decreased productivity. It's hard to focus in a pandemic. In fact, it's hard to focus in general. Some of us have construction noises outside our houses, and some of us have families which are sometimes louder than construction noises. I noticed that I would be in a meeting or a class, and even though I was paying attention, I would not be able to absorb any information at all. If you asked me what I had learned right after my class, I would probably be able to tell you 20% of it. And this is an infuriating process that many of us go through, where we focus our attention towards learning something, only to forget that information almost right after. So after going through this repetitive cycle of being unproductive that day, what I did was I gave myself a very undeserved break. And I went on Netflix to watch one of my favorite shows, which happens to be Sherlock Holmes. And I realized that if someone asked me to reiterate or describe the episode I just watched, I would probably be able to do it. In fact, if I asked any of you right now to describe or recount your favorite movie, you would probably be able to do it surprisingly well. But why is that? When we're watching a show or a movie, we aren't trying to remember anything. And yet, the information just sticks to us naturally. So why is it when we're in a class or a meeting and we're actively listening and actively taking down notes, suddenly the information becomes that much harder to remember? Well, I realize the difference is that when we're in a class or a meeting, our brains have to process this random bits of information being taught to us. But when we're watching a movie, the information is instead presented in the form of a story. So our brains view this information as a continuous flow of events, which makes remembering it a lot easier. This brings me to my first point of effective self-learning, which is to convert the information you have to learn in the form of a story. The human brain loves stories. It's how we naturally perceive the world. And it is for that reason, learning in the form of a story is a lot easier to remember. The second way to effectively self-learn is to do the most important task at the beginning of your day.
Have you ever noticed that throughout the day, our ability to make good decisions just progressively worsens? Because I do. So during the quarantine, my dad, who has high cholesterol, tried to join the fitness bandwagon by, eating healthier and working out. So at the start of the day, he'd have this super healthy breakfast. Big bowl of oats, lots of fruit. Then by lunch, he'd sort of be side-eyeing the food on the table that was off limits to him. But he'd pull through. Then after dinner, he'd have a midnight snack, which is really code for eating all the unhealthy Indian food he wasn't supposed to have. And I noticed this pattern in all of us, where our ability to make good decisions throughout the day just worsens. So we are able to concentrate and make good decisions at the start of the day. But as our work progresses and we get more tired, we just start losing more and more focus. An efficient way of making sure we maintain steady concentration is to do the most important, most difficult work at the beginning of your day. During this time, it is a lot easier to pay attention and make good, firm decisions to support ourselves and our productivity. And it also acts as this chain effect, because when we feel productive in the morning, we tend to become more motivated to continue that streak of productivity throughout the day, even if it is bound to reduce a little. The third way to effectively self-learn is to learn like you're going to teach someone else. So the interesting thing about this is, when our brain is processing information, having this mindset that we're going to explain this information to someone else will make us learn better. So what this does is, it actually makes our brain more aware of what it's learning. So not only does this sort of trick our brain into paying more attention, but our brains actually start finding ways to organize this information so that it'll be easier for us to explain to someone else. So I started doing this a few times. All the information I was learning, I pretended that I was going to reteach it to someone else. And I noticed changes in my behavior. The first thing I noticed was that I developed a much stronger understanding of the concept I was learning. In fact, not only did I understand it on a deeper level, but I actually remembered it for a longer period of time. Because I was no longer memorizing the information. It instead became like a natural law, a natural concept. Just like if you were to drop a glass vase from a 2-story building, you wouldn't need to know the law of gravity to know that the vase is eventually going to fall, shatter, and eventually break into a million pieces. You never memorized that information, and yet you would be able to predict that perfectly because you already have this strong understanding of how gravity works. And that is exactly the kind of strong concept we can develop if we learn like we're going to teach someone else. One of the most famous quotes of all time is by Mark Twain. And he said, "I have never let schooling interfere with my education." And I strongly believe The reason why this quote is so popular and so well liked is because we're being reminded that schooling and education are not the same thing. We tend to forget that education exists outside of school. We tend to forget that learning is an attitude that we owe ourselves to continue to raise our own bar, to continue to improve our own capabilities. We need to take that time to master being self-learners, or we will constantly be dependent on someone else to make progress within ourselves. Remember, if you are determined to learn, no one can stop you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Shveenita. At this time, we will be taking our break for intermission, lasting 10 minutes.
to the second session of TEDxYouth at CCHS.
Next up, we have Kristie Lampart, hailing from Miami, Florida. She's a visual arts enthusiast and is really excited today to give you guys her speech.
Please welcome Kristie and her speech, The Ride of Our Lives.
Imagine you're looking at the biggest roller coaster in the theme park. From an onlooker standpoint, it looks like your average ride, with drops, tunnels, inclines, and loop-de-loops. The downfall is that it is always in maintenance due to it constantly breaking down in the middle of the course. And today, I had the pleasure of being the one person on the ride when it came to a sharp halt in the tunnel. I don't remember how long I was there, but it was long enough that I lost track of time. What felt like months were just days. Day and night was indistinguishable, and darkness engulfed me as I silently sat in solidarity. In a tunnel, the other side is usually visible, indicated by the light at the end. This tunnel, however, just had a gate of darkness over the exit that prohibited me from escaping. When I was going up the roller coaster slope initially, I was a mere high school junior with so many responsibilities stacked onto me. SATs, college, the future, etc. Personally, I wasn't ready for any of that. I felt like I was too young to have to worry about those things when I barely enjoyed being a teenager. I was never a bad student now that I think about it. I'd consider myself a rather smart individual. But I was just great at procrastinating. Later was my favorite phrase. I always thought that I still had so much time left to just continue to put tasks on the back burner to focus on something trivial because I still had time. I'm already approaching the highest point of the ride. I thought it would have been longer because of how far it looked at the time. One day, the school CAP advisor visited our class to talk about college. From tuition to student loans to the stats of how many people graduate with debt, everything began to seep in that there was no more time for me. I'm going to start collecting my scraps of time that I have lying around and paste them all together before I have none. I'm at the peak. The view is beautiful, but I can't see the drop. I'm starting to feel anxious and uneasy on top of this large, narrow, parabola-shaped hill, just waiting to tip and plummet at lightning speed. The air is thinner than what I'm used to. Taking in satisfying breaths is more difficult. I finally understood that there was a lot of preparation and work ahead of me. But my superhuman ability to procrastinate rears its head and becomes harder to control. If the work I turned in wasn't half-heartedly completed, then it wasn't completed at all. It became seldom that I did homework or any assignment for that matter wholeheartedly. The work piling up, slowly creating a mountain from the molehill was my new norm. My mom regularly told caveats about doing good in school, doing the work, getting the grades, winning the scholarships, to ultimately get a good education to not have to live the life that she does. All the while, this reminder also informs me that I cannot afford college, my GPA is subpar, and I haven't been applying myself to my fullest capacity in majority of my classes. The roller coaster cart slowly begins moving forward until it finally meets the track and sends me straight down the hill with ferocity and wildness. The speed of the decline pinned me to my seat. It would have pulled me out the ride if there was no seatbelt. The thin, dry wind sliced my airways, making it hard to scream. The thought of my mother working insane hours to support me just to repay her with an incompetent daughter took a toll on my spirit. I began to regret my decision to not apply myself in everything I did. Colleges don't know me. Anything about me that can't be filled into their little applications don't exist. They don't care about intellect that can't be measured by grades, class rank, and GPA. The violent tsunami of realization and failure washed over me, and my grades reflected that. And like glass, I cracked under the unmeasurable amount of pressure that I placed on myself. I thought that I wouldn't amount to anything, just wasting precious oxygen that could have been inhaled by someone who could do greater things than I, someone who wouldn't take the day for granted by doing insignificant things. I looked at time like it's an unlimited supply and don't use every day to my advantage. I felt like I failed everyone around me. My exterior might have been nothing but smiles and sunshine, but in reality, I was genuinely miserable. The days would start and end so quickly, drawing me in closer to my demise. The ride stopped abruptly, like it hit an invisible wall. The sudden end jerked me forward before whipping me back in place. I can't turn around, and the roller coaster's overhead restraints won't lift. I'll have to stay here and wait. The coronavirus made it to the US. Initially, when COVID-19 cases rose and school closed, I didn't think much of it. I just took it as an extra week of spring break. However, when that week turned into months, I realized that there was no return to school and the final quarter would be done virtually. Due to the pandemic, every SAT and ACT tests were canceled, and a lot of colleges and universities became test optional. This also meant that everyone stayed home and everything is closed. Time was frozen, but on fast forward all at once. Everything outside my home was occurring with such rapidness that it was overwhelming to hear from inside. School became easier for me to handle though. This is a new situation for everyone, so accommodations were made to make the predicament we're in less stressful. We just turned in the work assigned, then went about our day. There was really nothing else to do but scroll through social media and admire the posed lifestyles I wish I had, and do some self-reflection. After a while in the tunnel, I stopped thinking of a way to get out. The break from that terrifying drop this gives me is rather nice. Yes, I still want to leave, but I'm in no rush. Sitting in that tunnel gave me the chance to do some self-evaluation. Why am I here? Honestly, I was tired of spending my free time sulking. What am I crying about now? I no longer had to worry about the dastardly SAT and ACT or work by the dozen, so what's the problem? I wasn't upset that I didn't get straight A's or take all AP courses. I couldn't possibly. So what's the issue? I remember hysterically crying to my younger sister once about how I wish I played a sport and how that could have made my life easier. When she asked me why I felt this way, I froze. Why did I feel that way? I'm not interested in sports, and I've never done anything traditionally sport-related either. Then I realized, if I was good in a sport, then I wouldn't really have to worry about paying for school. I don't have to worry about my mom struggling to pay for my education. My awards would speak for themselves. My highlights are proof of my talent. Scouts would watch me live and see how valuable I truly was. Schools would see that I'm worth the time, effort, and money. Through self-evaluation, I realized that my dilemma is about not having any achievements to my name. After 4 years, I couldn't say that I did something worthwhile. I've never proven myself worthy of anything. I couldn't say I made honor roll. I couldn't say I participated in any form of competition of some sort. I couldn't say that I was on a board. I couldn't say that I had goals being achieved when I barely had goals to begin with. I was caught up in people not seeing me as valuable because I didn't even see my own self as valuable. I haven't done anything as of now. I needed a change. The fire department arrives. They come up to the tunnel to give me my ultimatum. We're doing everything we can to fix the situation. It's a simple operator error. Would you want to stay on the ride and let it complete its course, or have us get you down? Well, if I leave, I won't get to experience the full ride. But if I stay, it could break it down. But if I stay, It could break down again, and it might not be as simple as an operator error. I've been through so much already, so why not continue? But am I willing to be stuck in another tunnel? I wait for my inner dialogue to cease before I make my decision. I'll stay on the roller coaster. I started implementing changes as soon as I found the root of my problem. My grades recovered. When school ended, I finally got the ability to focus deeper on myself. I began implementing manifestation and meditation into my routine. I write out my goals, both short-term and long-term, and actively try to accomplish them every day. In the span of 5 months, I had my first job as a marketing assistant at a corporate business, interviewed the likes of Elle Varner and Nicholas Cooper, became vice president of my school's Black Student Union, and co-founded a nonprofit organization called Letters to the System, intended to magnify the voice of youth experiencing any form of discrimination in their environment. I was suddenly launched from the tunnel, finally seeing the light on the other side. The loop-the-loops, drops, and sharp turns are the most invigorating ones I've ever experienced. The ride was at an equilibrium, ensuring me that it wouldn't get stuck anytime soon. I lift my hands in the air and fully embrace the freedom of no longer being stuck in the dark and enjoy the rest of the ride. The roller coaster called life is always unpredictable, with stops squished in between the ups and downs, pauses sandwiched between loop-the-loops and sharp turns. Each person's ride is equally different as well, with their own unique course. Some have higher inclines for a more dramatic drop. Others are stuck on the top of their ride. Regardless of where you get stuck, reflect on why you might be there. Find some good in what might seem to be a bad situation, and prepare for when you get out. Because at the end of the day, this roller coaster that we're all on only has one end, and it is not while you're in that dark tunnel. You might not see the light at the end or feel like there's a way out now, but if you make the most of your predicament, the other side will never be too far away, because the best rides always have the highest drops.
Thank you for your very inspirational speech, Kristie.
Our next speaker is a Cape Coral High School IB senior, Sofia Guruchaga, and her speech is called My Journey Through Introspection.
Hi, my name is Sofia Guruchaga, and today I'm going to be giving a talk about introspection. Now, introspection is the analyzation of one's own thoughts and feelings, and I'm going to be talking about how introspection ultimately changed my view of the world and how I view myself. My journey of introspection initially began in March, when quarantine started, and I had an abundance of time to myself and abundance of time to reflect on who I was and my life. I initially came across the idea of introspection through surprise, surprise, a TikTok video. In this video, a girl was discussing how she uses introspection and how it ultimately changed her self-image and how she viewed the world. I wanted to, during this time, also conduct areas of introspection and implement it into my life, as I didn't have really anything else to do. So, ways that I introduced introspection into my life is through journaling. I initially was journaling every single day, and what I did was I would journal my thoughts throughout the day, what I had done through the day, how I was feeling, etc. And what I would do is, at the end of the week, I would reflect on each day and reflect how my week went as a whole. And through the initial weeks of reflecting on each day and coming up with a conclusion of how these weeks went, I quickly began to realize that I was a very sad and insecure person. And I guess I just wasn't projecting it in a way where I was made self-aware of this. And what I would do is dehumanize who I was and talk down on who I was. And I guess I was not initially self-aware of this, because I would forget about what I wrote during the day, and during the end of the week, I guess I would remember And it was this ongoing cycle of putting myself down and telling myself things that weren't necessarily true. And it just opened my eyes about what I was doing to myself. And as the story continues, a few months went by, I think during May, so 2 months later, of this reflecting and self-admiration, self-affirmation, I went across one day and I looked in the mirror and it just all hit me. I just came to like an epiphany. It's very hard to explain, but of like, wow, why am I doing this to myself? And during that time period, I gained a little shred of confidence and hope for my future. And what I did is I grabbed that little piece of confidence and I ran with it. I started to discover who I wanted to be in the future, 6 months from now, years from now. And I wanted to express myself and gain confidence in other ways. So I started to research on ways in which I could express myself and gain confidence as a result. And through this confidence search, I realized that I like to express my confidence through what I wear. And there's the old saying, what you wear dictates how you feel, which is very true for me. I like to dress up and it makes myself feel better. And while I was going through this phase of discovering what I liked and what I like to wear, I came across another little facet that I never realized about myself, that I had some sort of suppressed body image issues that I was not made aware of. So I'm just gonna give you a little example. So this is what I like to wear. This is a women's small. I like this shirt a lot. And what I was discovering is that I used to think I could fit into this. This is a men's medium. I used to think that I was this big. Now, in comparison, it's just crazy. It really opened my eyes on how I viewed myself. This was an issue that I had that I didn't realize initially. And now I had to deal with this along with the other things that I was trying to overcome through reflecting and introspection. And I started to research because I knew that I wasn't the only person dealing with these issues. And through my research, I discovered a very good and useful resource. It's called the National Organization for Women, and they provide a lot of statistics regarding women. And I found out that in 2020, they initiated a study, and in 2020 alone, they discovered through the sample that they had gathered that 78% of teenagers who are of the age of 17 already had experienced body image issues. And I realized at that moment that I was of that 78% of women, and that I was going to begin to overcome this statistic. And it really opened my eyes to the world that I'm not alone, and there are others like me. And I also wanted to share, along with my journey, some things that I wrote in my journal, because when I was trying to plan this speech, I didn't want to memorize and through memorizing forget what I'd written, because I read through it and it's quite important. So I'm just going to read it. This is the journal that I used for introspection practices and through reflecting. It smells like roses. It's very cute. So I wrote these two things the day that I realized that I wanted to change my life and become the person that I always wanted to become. This is what I wrote. I have realized that the most amazing thing today. It's important to know how to be alone, with your thoughts, with your being. I think people forget how important it is to be alone and try to avoid this, because being alone with your thoughts can be a scary thing, but the bigger picture allows you to know yourself, discover your presence, allow it to be your own best friend. Maybe people are scared of themselves. I've always filled this space with people in order to avoid myself, but I now enjoy being alone. I can be happy alone, sad alone. I've come to be my own best friend. I now know who I am and who I want to become. And then this is another thing. A year ago, and many years before that, I was faking my smile and pretending to be someone who I wasn't. I was very good at pretending. Because of this, I realized that I had to change for myself, and only myself. Now I've started to do all the things that make me feel happy, make me feel alive. I want to try to not overthink the future, but rather be present in the life that I was given. I have now started making decisions on who I want to be and want to be 6 months from now. At first, you have to force it to make your body aware of who you want to be. Every interaction, every smile. But now I feel connected to myself, to this body, to this earth. So I don't have to force it anymore. When I am able to finally tell my story in the future, I want to challenge people to start doing things today, to start implementing who you want to be 6 months from now, because you will get there. You will be happy one day. So, recap. Try to have a main idea to this. I finally can say that I'm happy. I know who I am, and introspection helped me get to where I am through reflecting. Now, this process was hard. It did not happen in a day, as I said earlier. It has some rough patches. It's gonna unlock things that you may have stored away and that people and even yourself might not want to know about you. So, I am trying to implement things and ideas about who I want to become 6 months from now. And one important thing that I learned through the introspection process, and one I don't know, it's just fun thing that I always think about is, if 12-year-old you were to see who you are today, would they be happy? And for a long time that answer is no, but now I can say that answer is yes. I wish I could show pictures about who I was 1 year ago versus now, like the real TED Talk, like on a presentation, but I can't do that. But let me just say the images are night and day. So I just want to share my story and just let everybody know that we all can do it. If I can do it, you definitely can do it, because we all have that power within us.
Thank you for having the courage to share that with us today, Sofia.
Next up, we have Zain Patel. He's a rising senior, and he is super inspired by social entrepreneurship. He additionally has already created 2 startups.
Please join me in welcoming Zain Patel in his speech, Living Breath by Breath.
July 31st, 2019. I was driving back to the hotel from a Safeway in California. I opened a box of granola bars which I had eaten several times before. As I began eating, my throat closed up, and my skin erupted into mosquito-like bumps. As the highs began to appear, the feeling tricked up to my neck and surrounded my throat like a spider catching a fly. The web began to form, and I started whisper screaming with any breath and voice I had, asking my parents to take me to the hospital. I was without medication, no EpiPen to take, no life-saving pill to give me some hope of seeing August 1st. A few minutes later, we reached the hospital. I was on the verge of not being able to breathe at all, and as the doctor arrived, I began pestering with questions, asking if I was going to live. At that point, my body was filled with fear and anxiousness, and it continued to elevate throughout the night. I was living breath by breath. 9 days after the reaction, it was time for me to attend a leadership conference at a local university. After settling into my dorm, I gazed outside the window, wondering about what the food in the dining hall was going to be like, the people I was going to meet, and how the overall experience was going to pan out. As I was walking down the stairs into the common room, I decided to approach a fellow student and engage in my first conversation since the reaction. My first conversation was with a kid named Alfred. We talked about Toronto, Seattle, the differences in city, plane rides, the East Coast, everything. As the conference progressed, we sat through classes, learning about business. when a point surrounding thinking and business philosophy was brought up. Intentional thinking was the model, and as the class finished, Alfred and I began discussing this idea, attempting to put it into use within our own lives. Intention leads to impact, and that was the biggest thing we had in common. UConnect was a venture Alfred had begun, working towards a vision of providing resources to underprivileged kids through an educational platform. An evident problem had been taken and was adapted to fit a viable solution. That was my kind of impact. August 15th was the last day of the conference, and as I began to pack my bags, I heard a knock on the door. Alfred invited me to join UConnect and work towards his initial vision of building a platform for students. I was thrilled. We had taken this idea of intentional thinking and pursued that model through the lens of business, positively impacting the world. Upon returning home, I began working alongside Alfred, understanding his why and the motivation behind building a better solution. The skills I learned from UConnect and the Leadership Conference propelled me to a moment where I figured out my vision. Later that summer, I planned to go out to lunch with a couple of friends. Sounds simple, right? Once I arrived at the restaurant, I noticed a bifurcation or division between the group and I. Coming from an environment where I was one of the few kids to have allergies, I had to constantly confirm every ingredient I was going to consume, where the contents were going to be made, and how it was going to be cooked. I had to navigate a new landscape where I would order something with 5 to 10 questions following my order. Is it safe? Where is the bread made? Can you warm it in a separate container than his? Are you sure that's okay? Is it processed normally? Etc. Then there were my friends, who would walk into the store, check the menu, see what looked appetizing, and purchase whatever they wanted. Ordering was a process. I realized how tough it was, and all for a sandwich and a bag of chips. After my reaction, I was afraid to go into the kitchen, not knowing what was safe to eat in my own house, a place where I was supposed to feel safe. I was afraid of every food that lined the pantry wall, constantly checking multiple times what the label said and if I was going to be okay with the product. My vision was to address this fear and reach as many people as I could. Day after day, my experience was reciprocated by more than 32 million Americans. Food insecurity and uncertainty had become a common theme in households just like mine, without any sign of a solution. My solution arose after a conversation with the granola bar company. I had a couple extra hours and wanted to investigate a little bit more into my reaction. During the call, I learned that there was never a guarantee surrounding eating. Some companies choose to place restrictions on food, some don't. Cross-contamination is always a possibility, and there is no distinct solution for this disease. My precautions were enough. The probability was still too high for an allergic reaction, which made eating risky. I visited my allergist and received another skin test so I could understand my allergies. I reviewed my blood test from a couple years prior, questioning the credibility of the test and consistently asking the doctors again and again why and how the allergies were coming and what I could do to avoid another reaction. No progress was made. Every single doctor I talked to had no answer or solution to my allergy problems, except avoidance. I was told over and over again to continue to check labels, confirm that the products didn't have nuts, and then I could eat them. Well, that's what happened in California a couple months prior, and I ended up in the emergency room. I was struggling, which meant others were as well. After the calls and appointments, the solution became evident. I grabbed my notebook and began writing down, note after note, excited about the ideas invading my head. Input meal plan here. Let's deliver it here. We are going to have a support staff. Let's move forward with this segment. After about 30 minutes of scribbling through the pages, I had it. I stepped away from my desk and stared at the solution to food security. A personalized meal plan, delivery, nutrition counseling, and community service for allergy-prone individuals. Every step of the process was going to be designed for you. We were going to manufacture foods differently, so there was absolutely no chance of cross-contamination or an allergic reaction. It was intentional. Allergies were personalized, and so were you. At the beginning of the process, I recalled the leadership conference, intentionally mapping out the steps of the business. From the ideation process to choosing a name, I wanted this to change people's lives. The process was interesting. When I began creating potential names, I was skeptical of how the name could tie into this idea of food. Names like Allergy Apron Living Freshly, and others popped into my head, but they simply weren't good enough. I'm sure there are those times where you listen to a name at a restaurant or company and go, wow, I know exactly what that company does, and you begin to see the creativity that went into generating that name. So I went back and continued brainstorming. I was entering my third year of French at the time, and we had concluded the year with the unit on food and grocery stores. So I thought, why not make the name foreign? Spice it up, so to speak. The French food culture is about enjoying the art of good food and the power to create togetherness, combining the pleasure of taste with the balance between humans and the food, and that is what I wanted to create. The joy of eating regardless, so I took it in that direction. I became intentional with the name. This was the first thing any consumer was going to see. The name on the box, website, anywhere. So I opened my e-textbook and started scrolling through the pages. I landed upon nourriture, which translated to food, and the noun la, which translated to the. I closed the textbook. The decision was made. The name was going to be La Nourriture. That's what the mission was about. The food. When people saw the name, I wanted them to think of the French food culture and pass the allergy restrictions. Now that I had a name, I dove into customer discovery. And as I continued to move forward, I learned that there are a lot of individuals who are looking for solutions to this problem, and had not found a reliable alternative. When I went back to my notes and continued mapping out the steps, I realized that nutrition counseling needed to be addressed. That's when I began to reflect on my experience, pre and post allergies, and outside of personal coping, there was no help for dealing with the problem that essentially taxed my body 3 to 5 times a day, every time I would consume a product. So I had devised the first aspect of the company. Counseling was going to be a focal point and really gave parents the chance to understand what they could do for their kids and stop worrying about their kids sitting at the peanut-free table and the emotional impact it was going to have on them. The next step was the meal plan. Evidently, this was the hardest and the most important part of the process. In terms of the hardest part, it's finding a way to ensure that you eat everything that's safe while getting the nutrients you need. I was forced to cut out multiple brain foods, all of which have substantial health benefits. Extracting essential vitamins and minerals from nuts left a void in my diet, but oatmeal, granola, and sunflower seeds were all foods that were acceptable and filled that void. For every customer, it was about generating that alternative and inputting a new food into their plan, one that was going to give them the same benefits and not allow them to lose any nutrients. The final part was delivery. The food was made, the dish was ready to go. How were we going to get 20 plus meals to the customer on time? Well, thank goodness for planes. At that point, it was about selecting the perfect box that was going to take the product from warehouse to home. Once it arrives, you run, open the box, put the meals in the fridge, and began the La Nourriture experience. I mentioned intentional thinking before, but the process really began when I launched the customer discovery, because I wanted to learn more about the problem I was dealing with outside of my personal experience. When you think about your problems through other people's eyes, you gain clarity as to how the problem can be solved and the actions that can be taken to move towards a positive direction. This is where the connection with allergy-prone individuals became invaluable. Having someone who has experienced an anaphylaxis reaction to talk to and know exactly what you mean. Discussing your fears, hopes, coping strategies openly with people who are in the same boat is very powerful. Yet, it's still a missing link in the allergy community and one that I wanted to nurture. The biggest part of the intentional thinking process was asking myself why. Why did I want to create this idea? Why was it going to work? And ultimately, why was it going to have an impact? The more I asked the question, the clearer the vision became. La Nourriture was the solution. La Nourriture isn't an official company, but the solution to allergies is something that inspires me to reflect on my experience and how it lends to others, and the fact that they are all part of one collective experience. I want to offer each customer a more positive allergy experience, the experience of food freedom. Let's say, for example, you are in California. You enter a Safeway and are selecting a quick snack to eat for dinner. You pick up a granola bar package. Then you remember you brought some delicious allergy-free La Nourriture bars on the trip with you. You head to the car, eat the bar, and everything is fine. That situation will not happen for everyone, but working to find and cultivate a solution will gradually begin to reduce the amount of hospital visits allergy-prone individuals have to endure. Because for someone, my story is more than an idea. It's a solution to a lifelong problem. Honorary Tier is more than a food company. It's a way to ensure everyone is food secure and comfortable with the everyday experience of nourishment. Embrace the food, savor the solution, and never live breath by breath. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your speech, Zain.
Our next speaker is Bonnie Jin. She is a 21-year-old student at Johns Hopkins University. Please welcome Bonnie Jin in her speech, How to Practice Optimism and Make Change Even When the World is Burning.
Is there still hope left in this world? Right now, the world looks pretty bad. Between the pandemic and politics, everything seems, well, terrible. And for young people especially, it's easy to feel like nothing will get better. In the US, a whole generation of young people are on track to end up poorer than their parents. Just yesterday, I was talking to a friend who graduated in this pandemic, and between struggling to find a job and struggling to pay off student loans, she's lost a lot of hope. Faced with everything that's going on, cynicism makes sense. But there's an underlying assumption in that cynicism, and that's that the world can only get worse. That this is already the best the world will ever be, so we might as well just enjoy life and watch the world burn. With how overwhelming 2020 has been, I certainly felt that way. But as I was standing in line to buy toilet paper, I couldn't help but ask myself, is this really it? Today, I want to share with you why you should still choose hope. I'll also show you how you can apply optimism and start making tangible change in your community. But first, I want to share with you the story of how I lost hope. You see, I'm actually someone who's really struggled with staying optimistic. It all started in 2019. I was studying abroad in Japan and everything seemed great. I had a 3.9 GPA, I was leading this international think tank, and I even gave a TEDx talk, much like this one. Students have a moral responsibility to give voice to the stories of those who are unseen. But beneath all of that, I was dealing with anxiety and a serious loss of self-confidence. When I returned to Johns Hopkins University, I was burnt out, depressed, and felt so worthless, I convinced myself that I had no future. So earlier this year, I decided to go on a medical leave of absence. I thought that taking time off would be a great way to process everything that had happened and to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. But instead of finding hope, I found myself even more sad and lonely. I was too ashamed to tell anyone what I was dealing with, and I found myself isolating from others even without quarantine. And soon, the things that had made me sad just grew louder and louder in my small, dark apartment in Baltimore. My only connection with the outside world was the news, but the news only made it worse. Don't you feel that way too? Night after night, story after story, the news is heartbreaking. I started wondering why I kept seeing all of these negative stories around me. That's when I came across a study conducted last year by University of Michigan professor Stuart Soroka. The study wanted to compare reactions to positive and negative news. So they monitored the heart and sweat rate of people from 6 different continents as they watched the news. What the study found was that around the world, humans have a tendency to give more attention and reaction to negative news. Negativity bias makes sense. Because the potential costs of negative information often outweigh the benefits of positive information, it's more advantageous to pay more attention to negative information. In contrast, positive stories are often seen as unnecessary, and we often label those who focus on the positive as childish or naive. In Soroka's study, they actually found that the reaction participants gave to positive stories was the exact same as the reaction they gave to the gray screen in between the news clips. And so we see this negative narrative everywhere because that's what drives interest. Negative stories sell. It's why news coverage of current events worldwide is mostly negative. But no matter how interesting or important those negative stories are, it's exactly this overwhelming focus on the negative stories that drive cynicism and isolation. I certainly felt that way. Watching the news alone in my apartment, I became a pessimist. I silently withdrew from all my friends and obligations because they reminded me too much of the painful present. I tried to go back to the good old days and rewatched Ghibli movies to reminisce. I felt like no matter what I did, nothing would change. I told myself that I was finally seeing the world the way it really was. Because with headlines after headlines, statistics after statistics, how could I not? But negative stories aren't the whole story, and the world doesn't have to be this way. Our knowledge of the world might point us towards pessimism, but we've got to will ourselves to overcome it. Here, I'm reminded of Antonio Gramsci, an Italian social theorist and activist who wrote, "I'm a pessimist because of intelligence, but an optimist because of will." Gramsci wrote these words while imprisoned under Mussolini's fascist Italy. Gramsci loved humanity, but when fascism overtook his beloved country, it was easy for him, in his small, dark prison cell, to lose hope. At the time of his death, all signs showed that Europe would fall to fascism. But as Gramsci challenged himself, our job is to find hope even when the statistics say otherwise. This isn't to say that optimism is blind to facts. You can and should acknowledge the horrors of the world. Between the threat of nuclear war, environmental disaster, or a future pandemic, there's a lot to worry about. But if anything, these disasters show us how important it is to practice optimism in these times. If we don't choose hope, then we're saying that this is it. This is the best the world will ever be. Optimism means understanding that this isn't the way the world ends. The world can get better. And so optimism is everything we do, in spite of what the world offers. Now you might feel that this is irrational, and that's kind of how hope works. In a world where we're surrounded by negative stories, it's illogical to find hope. At the start of the Cold War, English social theorist Bertrand Russell pointed out, extreme hopes are born of extreme misery, and in such a world, hope could only be irrational. But it's exactly this hope that's needed and necessary to build a different world from the one we have now. Just imagine the potential for change if we just choose to believe that the world can get better. Imagine the world we could create if we didn't limit our possibilities before we even try. Actually, limiting the possibilities for my own future was a big reason why my mental health broke down. I recently found my Hopkins bucket list while cleaning in quarantine. 14 promises bulleted on a sticky note. I'd stuck the page in my journal a week before freshman orientation. I remember the optimism I felt when I wrote these down, how excited I was to start a new life in college. My brother still has this video of me crying as I opened my acceptance letter. I had so many dreams of things I wanted to do, the person I wanted to be. As I reread this list, now 3 years later, I felt the urge to cry. No matter how many things on that list I had accomplished, I couldn't help but focus on the ones I didn't do. It's that negativity bias again. It's been a couple weeks since I read the list, but it's those points that still replay in my mind. Since entering college, the more I put myself out there into the world, the more I drew this hard line between who I wanted to be and the person I actually was. I just couldn't see my future as being anything than the boxes I saw as realistic or possible. That self-doubt grew until it became my entire identity. I turned down opportunities I was clearly qualified for. I felt anxious to talk about things I was so confident in, and I felt like an imposter at my own university. Self-doubt formed the basis of my depression and loss of identity. That's my personal struggle with self-doubt, but self-doubt actually has pretty large implications for public policy. Whenever you advocate for social change, whether in your school, your town, or your country, there's going to be people who tell you to bring it down, to be more realistic, to stick within the limits of what's possible. But for too long, that line of thinking, which is pretty condescending by the way, has led to no change. It assumes that there is no other possibility except for the ones defined by what's already been done. If we as a society keep drawing the hard lines around what we think is possible, We're limiting our own choices before even sitting down at the negotiating table. Instead, we need to start reimagining what's possible. We need to start visualizing and sharing stories of the world we want to live in. Imagining sounds like a super basic idea, but it's actually really transformative. After all, if you can't imagine your future as being any different, you're unlikely to try and change it. So it's a huge reason why people choose not to vote or participate in politics. But by choosing not to imagine, you're actually stepping away from the responsibility of changing your future or the future of the world for the better. As I started learning more about optimism, even though I still felt pretty hopeless, I decided that I wanted to try and put it into practice. And so over the summer, I worked as a fellow for Boston City Councilor Michelle Wu. And to my surprise, I started seeing the real world change optimism and reimagining can create. We effectively reimagined what Boston could do as a city. We passed a citywide ban on face surveillance technology. We pushed for equitable funds for those devastated by COVID-19, and we even laid out the steps for a Boston Green New Deal, which advocates for a citywide, systems-level response to climate change. Last month, Wu launched her campaign for mayor of Boston. That day, I worked with 4 incredible young women behind Students for Ed Markey. These are young teens who have hundreds of organizing hours under their belt already. They reminded me of myself 5 years ago, when I was the only high school student helping run Millennials for Bernie Sanders. Back then, I didn't see fellow organizers as competition, but as inspiring individuals I could work with towards our shared dream. I remember feeling so comfortable and transformed by my experience. Every day was such a joy as I kept imagining and reimagining the work that we could do and the person I could be. And it was at that moment that I realized how important optimism was in bringing happiness and meaning to my life. Optimism gives people hope, and reimagining allows community members to imagine a better world and to start organizing to make it happen. Optimism builds resilient communities. There's already so much we can point towards that makes the case for optimism. In the last 20 years, extreme poverty, hunger, and child labor have all fallen worldwide. In the US, activists have brought key human rights issues, whether on gender, race, class, or sexual orientation, into the national spotlight. And even I found it in myself, that self that had given up on so many things in life, to start a mutual aid spreadsheet at Johns Hopkins. And optimism, at least for me, is far better than its opposite, that the world is doomed to fail, that we should just remember the good old days because all that's left is to help make sure the worst outcome happens. I mean, who wants to live in a world like that? I wish it didn't take me nearly a year of sadness to understand how powerful the task of optimism truly is. I'm proud to report that I've regained control over my life. Everything started turning around when I began reimagining the identities I had boxed myself into. I'm still a work in progress, but I reached a point where I can let go of some self-judgment and just do the things I love. And every time I hear another awful piece of news, I start reimagining the solutions that are possible. Then I research as much as I can about those solutions until the negativity of the original article gets buried by the optimism of a better future. And don't restrict yourself in your reimagining either. These solutions should be ideals that large-scale movements, not isolated individuals, work towards. The hard part is letting yourself imagine in the first place. So here's your task. Reimagine your identity in society and reimagine what your community could look like. What else can you achieve? What else could your school, local community, or country become? It might sound easy, but I know how powerful it is. And almost like a prayer, remind yourself that a better world is possible. As Martin Luther King Jr. paraphrased, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. In the wealthiest country in the history of the world, we have the means to create a better society, but it'll take radical optimism and reimagining to step towards a more just future. Thank you.
Thank you, Bonnie, for sharing your speech today.
Our last speaker of the afternoon is Shreya Hedge. With her speech, I'm 17 and everything is still possible.
School, what is it? Let us turn to Google for its definition. Now, if you look at all of these definitions, you notice that there's some similarity between these words. Organization, institution, place. It seems to suggest that school is some sort of a location where students have to go for a fixed duration of time in order to receive formal educational training from a predefined curriculum. School is much more than that. It's a mindset. Around 1 billion children head to school. This is more number of children than ever before. However, schooling doesn't always mean learning. There are more number of non-learners at school than outside of school. According to UNICEF's estimation, around 617 million children have not yet reached a minimum proficiency in reading and mathematics, even though 2/3 of them go to school. Lengthy textbooks do not make sense. In school, you're supposed to read these textbooks, do your homework, and then give tests after a couple of days. But in order to ensure a proper learning, we need to involve healthy discussions and debates. Now, why are interactive discussions so much important? According to a study conducted on 4th September 2019 that was published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, even though students think that they learn more through traditional lectures, they actually learn more in classrooms that employ something called as active learning discussion. So what reforms do I propose? Let us take science. It is very important to ask the right questions in science, not only the numerical ones, but also concept building ones. Because as much as I understand the importance of learning older concepts in order to build on the newer ones, it is also important to understand all the problems from ground up. Why can't students nowadays solve the same problems that Newton did many centuries ago? Because according to Carl Frey, around 60% of future jobs have not yet been developed. According to Dylan Williams, the purpose of education is to prepare students for a future we cannot envisage. So it is important to teach them how to think and not to memorize. Life doesn't throw problems at you with predefined solutions. You have to think from ground up. Mathematics is not just about deriving formulas and applying it to problems. It is much more than that. It is about using logic and aptitude in order to solve everyday problems. Now, every stand-up comedian who is talking about math, I've never used sine theta, cosine theta, differentiation, integration in my everyday life. Now, I don't blame them for that. But have you ever wondered who is the reason for all of this? Now, let us take social science. Instead of rote learning, it is very important that the students learn the values through debates and discussions. What would the students do if they were Shivaji or Ashoka themselves? What would they do in future circumstances with same problems? Students should imagine themselves as historical figures and think about what they would do if they were in their situation. Now, this is very important because you need to understand and analyze every single detail. You'll be very surprised to see what you'll uncover by doing this. Recently, I participated in the Ross Mathematics program. It's a math program for high school students where students learn number theory for approximately 6 weeks. Now, in this program, we were asked to prove this one simple problem. Prove that there is no integer between 0 and 1. This might seem very simple and somewhat stupid, but I learned so many things from it. It is that you shouldn't take anything for granted. You need to understand every circumstance and analyze its every detail. Only then you'll be surprised to see what all you can uncover from this exercise. I really like physics and mathematics. So recently I approached this physics professor in a nearby university, asking her if I could research at her lab. So she gave me 2 reasons as to why I couldn't do it. Number 1, high school students do not have the expertise to use expensive equipments. And number 2, PhD students are in it for the long haul. So professors simply have to waste time training high school students. Let me give you an analogy to explain this. Now imagine a plastic ball river that is flowing. All of these plastic balls represent students in the education system. They're all subjected to the same sort of teaching, never being tailored to their particular passions or interests. Now why are they doing this? All these professors and government agencies think that there's too much of investment at an early age. So they wait for these plastic balls to somehow come and drop into these buckets at the very end of the line.
These buckets help with categorization. Now this categorization helps government to properly channelize the resources, because when you're a PhD student, you know what to do with your life. So there's no experimentation. But when we are high school students, we do not have an opportunity to explore the different passions we have. In India, there's a famous saying that you first become an engineer or a doctor, and then you decide what to do with life. So I propose a solution. All universities, all educational institutions must host some sort of summer programs or winter programs, which are research programs for high school students. This means that they'll make an informed decision under professors, because they'll have the right amount of guidance and mentoring. In many countries, the public schools are not as good as the private schools. Luckily, I went to a private school, the Keli Society School, whose stage I'm right now using. Unfortunately, many schools in India do not have toilets, do not have proper teachers, but nobody is doing anything about it. Recently, the National Education Policy was announced, and they seem to combat a lot of these problems, but there's a lot to do. I recently called up a local minister asking him what can be done about this situation. He said you need a minimum of 100 years in order to change the education system. It is all about thinking that anything is possible. Recently, I participated in the Breakthrough Junior Challenge, a video competition for students aged 13 to 18, wherein students are supposed to make a 3-minute video in order to explain any concept in life sciences, mathematics, or physics. Now, I decided to make a video on anti-sense therapy. I thought that this is a very hard topic, so I started emailing professors in and around Bangalore, but nobody replied. Then it suddenly hit me. I can try Biocon. So I started searching for emails, and then I came across Kiran Majumdar Shah's email. So I decided to send her a message. After 2 days, she actually replied to me. What can a high school student possibly offer a world-famous entrepreneur billionaire? Nothing, to be honest, but still she replied to me. It is all about thinking that if you do this one extra thing, if you send this one extra cold email, then your life can change forever. She put me into contact with some of her colleagues who came to conference calls with me and then helped me. Now, whenever you're scared to send that one cold email across or confront an adult, think that they did not do this when they were of your age. It is very helpful. It's not just about a yes or a no. There's always something in between. Barbara Corcoran, a famous entrepreneur, was all set to film her first TV series, Shark Tank. But then the producers gave her a call and said that her position was given to someone else. She did not choose no for an answer. She wrote an email to the producers, giving 3 compelling reasons, telling them why she is perfect for this role. Now this is her email. If she hadn't spent 20 minutes writing this email, her life wouldn't be as it is right now. So I'm still in high school. Recently, I was the youngest to be selected for the MIT Innovation and Leadership Bootcamp. I was one among the 100 selected out of an applicant pool of 2,500. If Barbara would have thought then that she couldn't do anything about it, she wouldn't have been on Shark Tank now. If I had thought that I'm not supposed to be a part of this program, I wouldn't have been selected for it because I wouldn't have applied for it. Now, if I hadn't done that, then I wouldn't have been a part of this program, which has produced around 6 Forbes 30 under 30 and whose businesses have raised almost $70 million in funding. You need to try out new things. It'll always surprise you. Ideas to the power of smart work is directly proportional to success. Number of failures is also directly proportional to success. But don't worry, I won't bring in a proportionality constant now. But the idea is that it is very similar to this quote that I feel is very meaningful. Life is just like a flute. It has many holes, it has emptiness, but if you work on it carefully, then you can produce beautiful melodies. So regardless of the loopholes in our education system, regardless of every politician's empty promises, we as students must realize that even though we are 20% of human population, we are 100% of our future. So fasten your seatbelts, buckle up, because we need to make use of the opportunities that surround us. And don't forget, age is just a number.
Thank you, Shreya. I would like to thank everyone for attending Southwest Florida's first ever TEDxYouth CCHS event. We hope you leave here inspired to make changes within your own community.
We just want to give a big thank you to all the speakers who were able to contribute tonight, whether it be from a local or a global scale.
We would also like to extend a tremendous thank you to everyone who has made this event possible. The Lee County School Board, Cape Coral High School, our principal, Mr. Engelhardt, Wink News, News Press, and also TEDx organization themselves.